Welcome back. Okay, so we're going to talk today. We're getting into chapter 11. Okay, so we're going to start just talking about sort of domains of functions in two dimensions, really. You can do this in multiple, but two dimensions. So let's start with that. Domains of some function of the form z equals f of x, y. Okay, so this starts just as you would in one dimension, you know, z equals or y equals f of x, with basic rules. First rule, you can never divide by 0. Okay, let's call that rule 1. Rule 2, you cannot take the square root of a negative number. Reason is because we're trying to express these things graphically, so we really aren't talking about complex numbers here. Okay, complex numbers, when we do that, we're doing something different. We're dealing with R2, the real numbers, the real plane, okay? 3, you cannot take the natural log of something that's 0 or negative. Actually, it's any logarithm. Okay, and also there are domain restrictions on arc sine and arc cosine and so what. I won't go through all of them. We'll just deal with those as they come up. And actually also on trig functions as well. For example, you can't take the tangent of pi over 2, right? So things like that. Okay, so we're going to mainly focus, though, on these 3, but this 4th one might show up. Okay, so let's do some examples. Let's start with f of x, y. Let's find the domain. For f of x, y equals y over 1 minus x squared. Okay, so in this case, just like you would in college algebra, you say, well, the denominator can't be 0. Let me change that color here. So 1 minus x squared cannot equal 0. So x cannot equal plus or minus 1. Now, we're going to go ahead, we're going to actually graph this because we're now graphing it. This is a planar equation, okay? Think of this as a set of points in the plane. So if we think of it as a set of points in the plane, the domain is everything except those 2 dashed lines. Okay, so let's okay, it's the only restriction we have here. Okay, let's do another. Let's take f of xy equals square root of xy. Okay, so now this one's a little bit trickier. Okay, so remember, we cannot take the square root of a negative number, right? So that means that we have to have x times y has to be greater than or equal to 0. Okay, so let's draw this. Now, here in this one, I drew dashed lines. That's similar to like an open circle when you would do this in one dimension, right? You would draw an open circle to indicate that point was thrown away. Here, when we did the dashed lines, that means the line is thrown away. But here we're actually going to include zeros. So let me put orange here. Let's do it a little thicker. There, it gets good. Do a little bit thicker. So these lines are part of the domain. Okay, now x times y should be greater than or equal to 0. That means that they should be the same sign, right? So if x is greater than 0, then y has to be greater than 0. If x is less than 0, then y has to be less than 0. So our domain is actually going to be this region here, as well as this region here. Okay? All right, I'll see you in the next video. We're going to do a couple more.